Righto, good morning everyone. Thank you for being here for the Australian Beef Report 2020 launch. So in Toowoomba here, we have a small, socially appropriate gathering of 20 people, which is good. So we've got in the room here some beef producers, beef industry representatives, beef industry service providers and media as well. So we're going to start off talking a bit about the what, the who and the why of the Australian Beef Report. So the what is an industry resource. What we've done in this report is detail the performance of family beef businesses right across Australia of all sizes. This follows on from the version we released in 2017, which had data up to 2016. This one has data up until June 2019. It's an independent publication. We haven't sourced or taken any funding to do this. We, which is Bush Agribusiness and Phil Holmes, have decided to put this resource together as an independent publication. That way we can call the issues as we see them, backed up by evidence, and we're not beholden to any funding organisation in that. Within that though, we do think it is important that we have the document reviewed as we did the last one, just to make sure what we're saying is robust and vigorous. So we've got independent reviews of the report, which we will go through later on with everyone. So who are the authors? A number of authors in this publication. We've got the primary authors. Phil Holmes, he can't be here today due to the fact that he's in New South Wales and can't get into Queensland, which some people have been lobbying for a while, so that's worked. Michael Wellington, who is here with us today, and myself, the primary authors of this report. We've also gone out and got some contributing authors to help write a chapter, which Michael will talk about a bit later on natural resource management. And that is Dione Walsh from the Northern Territory, Cole Payton from close to Toowoomba here, who can't be here today, he's out bush on property, unfortunately, and Bob Freeband from New South Wales, a pasture agronomist down there. So we'll talk more about their contribution a bit later on. We've also got within this publication 27 contributors of individuals and couples from across Australia, some beef producers who we think, and there's lots out there, we've picked a small sample of beef producers who the way they think and approach things is pretty, there's a lot in there that others can learn from. So we've captured that in a section we call the Pastoral Panel, which Michael will talk a bit more about later on. So why did we write it? Well, the beef industry is a very important part of the Australian economy. We think it's the biggest agricultural industry. It manages more land mass than any other industry in Australia, and we think that it's important that that is done profitably. And it is by and large at the moment, but we think there is room for improvement there. So we want to drill into that and have a look at that. And we also believe that there is a market and a need for an independent publication that looks at the business performance and how to improve it. And I've got no bull there because I think in some of the stuff that's put out on industry, it is a great industry and there's lots of glossy stuff out there, and we very much take a glass half full approach. But I've seen comprehensive analyses done of the industry that don't mention profitability and don't look at it. And the profitability of the industry on average is quite low. For Northern Australia, the returns from the operating side of the business, leaving the real estate business to one side, is less than 1%. For Southern Australia, it's negative. And we think that's a pretty big issue that needs to be addressed if it's going to be improved. So we look at that in detail and address that square on. We also think that there's a need for a professional resource for the managers of multi-million-dollar businesses. And that's what we view modern beef businesses as. They're multi-million-dollar businesses, and managers of multi-million-dollar businesses in any industry need a resource. And we've attempted to provide a resource for the managers of those businesses, the owners of those businesses, and also the service providers to those businesses. And to improve capital management. And capital management is a bit of a theme within this report, and we think that the management of capital is an issue for the beef industry. Intellectual capital is undervalued, we think. within the industry and more value needs to be placed on it. Environmental capital needs to be preserved, and there's a lot of very good environmental managers out there, but there are a minority of bad managers in the industry, which we think pose a significant risk to the industry overall. And we think the returns on financial capital in the industry generally are insufficient. So within this report, we've tried to address those issues, identify them, and look at how they can be improved. So I'll just go through now, Michael and I'll go through briefly the three main components of the report: industry performance, pastoral panel, and the effective utilisation and preservation of the natural resource base, which is a bit of a mouthful. So the industry performance, as I said before, we've got a detailed analysis of family beef businesses in Australia. So we split the whole industry up into north and south, north being Queensland, Northern Territory, and the top half of WA, south being the remainder, effectively. And we also cut those industries, the north and southern, up differently as well. We look at it by region. So break them up into region, which are the ABS regions, and a foundational bit of data we use in this report is the ABS data. There's 14 regions in the north and 14 regions in the south that we look at in detail in terms of the performance. We also break it up by herd size, and we'll look at some data on this in a minute. Those with less than 800 head, 800 to 1600, 1600 to 5400 head, and over 5400 head. So look at the impact of herd size on business performance, which is stark in there. We also look at it by market, those supplying predominantly slaughter markets, those supplying store markets, and the live export market, and have a look at the differences and similarities across there. For all of them, we've got 12 years of data. So what we've tried to do with 12 years of data, which is the same we had in the previous report, released in 2017, and also the Northern Beef Report, which we released, or which we were commissioned to do for Meat and Livestock Australia in 2013. We looked at a 12-year window to try and get the full cycle of seasons and prices within that, to get a picture of long-term industry performance. And we see that a lot in this data. I'll show it in a minute, where in recent years where prices have been high, things have been quite good, and that's excellent, but we do think it's good to take a long-term perspective through that full cycle. So what do we report? This is the data, the heavy stuff. We look at the business performance by cohort, and by cohort I mean a region, a herd size cohort, or a market cohort. We look at their income statement, what money they're making, what their income is, what their expenses are, what their cost structure is, their balance sheet, what assets are tied up in it, what's their debt structure. And we also look at whole business key performance indicators. What is their return on assets? Of that return on assets, what is coming from the operating business and what is coming from the real estate business? What's their finance coverage? How well can they service their debt? These are all measures we look at across those different cohorts there. We also get down to the herd performance level and look at that in detail. What's the herd income statement per animal unit? North and South, AE and DSE. What are these businesses, what income are they generating per animal unit? What are their direct costs per animal unit? What are their running costs per animal unit? And then what's their profit per animal unit run? And for all of them, we look at the average for each of them, and then the top 25%. We spend a lot of time looking at what are the factors that separate those top performers across the industry, and what can be learned from that for the whole industry to improve performance. Then we get into some discussions. There's lots of heavy data in here, but we also discuss it and analyse it and try and spell it out. We look at north versus south, the pros and cons there. And there is a trade-off. In the south, you've got very productive businesses, generate more kilos of beef per animal unit than the north as a whole, because it's a lot more productive, but there's lack of scale, and that constrains those businesses. As you get further north, we get a lot more scale. The productivity goes down, and that constrains those businesses. So there is a trade-off there, and it's those businesses that have that combination of scale and productivity that are able to really generate seriously healthy profits. We look at barriers to entry. Capital is a big barrier to entry for the industry. It is hard for young people to get into the industry, particularly with land values. We'll talk about that. Then for people in the industry, we look at what the barriers to profit are. What are the things that are stopping beef businesses making money? And then barriers to profitability. how land value affects that return on assets. We look at industry demographics, what the industry is made up of, particularly by herd size, and we'll show some graphs on that in a second. The long-term performance, like I said, over that 12-year window, broken up into years and 3-year blocks as well, to get a picture of there, try and get that long-term performance. And we have a look at the tidal influences, which is really the beef market. It's become the full cycle over that 12 years and what impact that has had. The scale requirements. What scale do you need to have a viable beef business? We address that in the report in detail. And the factors that separate the top performers is something we think is important to look at a lot, because from that tells all performers, even the top performers, and something that really sets the top performers apart. Even though they're doing well, they want to do better. They're hungry to improve performance. They don't want to rest on their laurels. And from all of this, there's something that all producers can learn to focus their attention on to improve performance. And we'll also look at industry comparisons. This is a detailed analysis of the Australian beef industry at family business level. We compare that to companies that are listed on the stock exchange to provide context there to say, okay, well, how does that compare to industries, businesses in other industries? And in some ways it's similar. An inherent feature of capitalism is that profit isn't guaranteed and businesses will have different returns. We think it's important to include that for context to this performance of the beef industry. We also look at some macro industry factors. Land values is a big one, particularly with what land values have done in the last 3 or 4 years. What effect is that having on the returns of the industry, and how does that affect people wanting to get into the industry? Terms of trade. We have discussed in the report that terms of trade, or the cost price squeeze, has actually been reversing over the last 20 years or so, which is a great opportunity for the industry. And there was an article in last week's Country Life on this, looking at that. Total factor productivity. This is where the industry can take advantage of that halt in the cost price squeeze to improve their bottom line by looking at that. Beef prices, obviously a big part of it. We've also got a section on rebuilding the herd. Coming out of the drought, what should people think about in terms of rebuilding the herd? And also a small section on climate risk. So as well as heavy data in there, there's lots of discussion on these factors that drive the long-term industry performance. So I've just got a graph here which may be a bit hard for some to see, but what we've got here is the northern industry top 25% producers in the blue, and the southern industry top 25% producers in the green, and then the average for each in the dotted line. Looking at their return on assets from their operating business. So we put land values to one side here. We're just looking at the operating business. And we can see here the north is averaging higher than the south, the top performers, just under 3 versus just under 2. But they're still pretty low returns, we think, better than the average. But when you couple that with capital returns, they are a lot healthier. The other thing is we can see the impact of these high price years here. For the northern top 25% producers, 40% of their profit was earned in those 3 years. For the south, it was over 50% earned in those 3 years. For the average of the north, 89% of their profit was made in 3 years. And for the southern average, that was the only 3 years they were in the black. So those high tide years are having a big impact on industry performance, but less so for the top performers, and that's something we look at in detail as well. Industry demographics. What this graph shows is the herds population by herd size. So we've got 200 to 800 head here, 800 to 1600 head in the green, 1600 to 5400 head in the blue, and over 5400 head in this small light green colour here. So we can see across all of Australia, this is north and south, those businesses that identify themselves as specialist beef businesses, where the majority of the agricultural business income comes from beef, 70% have less than 800 head. Scale is a major constraint for them. It's having an operating scale to have viable business sizes. But they're only managing 30% of the herd. The majority of the herd and the majority of the landscape is being managed by these larger producers here, and this is where most of the industry profits are being made, the larger producers here, and that's something we look at in detail. So I'll hand over to Michael now, who'll talk you through a couple of maps, the Pastoral Panel and the Natural Resource chapter. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Ian. So Ian's just taken us through the first couple of segregations or cohorts that we look at the analysis on, being the north and the south, and also herd size. Probably my favourite segregation that we do is the regional analysis. I love doing the regional comparisons, and that's because in the work that Phil, Lynn and I do, travelling around and working with producers, we get to hear all sorts of fantastic theories about where the best place in Australia is to produce beef. I remember doing a business edge workshop a couple of years ago down in Gundawindi, and we were talking about the average in the top 25%, and the top 25% has become a bit of an esoteric elite group that people think is very hard to be part of. It's not the case. The top 25% are everyday people, and some of them are in the room here today. But this particular producer in Gundawindi, we're talking about the average in top 25%, and he said, well, I went for a drive the other week, and I drove from Taroom to Wandoan, and I saw all the top 25% in Australia. They're on that road from Taroom to Wandoan. There's no way you could lose money along there. And a good theory, it is a pretty handy part of the country, but unfortunately not the case. The top 25% are everywhere. Every region in Australia has got its own strength and weakness. So when we look at the regional analysis and the regional comparisons, it's not so much about answering the question of where the best place is to produce beef. It's just about understanding what the relative strengths and weaknesses are in each region. So there's a lot of maps and a lot of different figures that come into the regional analysis. We've got a couple of snippets, a couple of examples here. This one is income per animal unit, or gross profit per animal unit. In the darker green there, we've got gross profit per animal unit up above 300, and then we progress down through to the white colour, which is less than $150 of income per animal unit. So we can see straight away we all want to move down to southern New South Wales and Tasmania based on that. Very productive part of the country, very high animal productivity, which drives very high income per animal unit. It's not looking so flash up in the Gulf and Western Queensland, but it's only part of the story. So the next one we've got here is total operating expenses, so your enterprise expenses and your overhead expenses per animal unit. Very expensive businesses to run, so very high operating expenses per animal unit in the dark red colours, and it becomes a lot cheaper to run every animal unit as we go down to the white. So now the story gets a little bit more complicated. We can see that the businesses down in this southern Australia, Tasmania region are of smaller scale. They're a lot more intensive. Each animal unit is more expensive to run, whereas those regions that didn't look so handy on the income side, their competitive advantage is in their economies of scale, the fact that they're extensive and each animal unit is quite cheap to run. So just a bit of a sneak peek into the regional comparisons and regional analysis there. Obviously that's only part of the story. We get down to the bottom line, the operating returns and the different land values, which will be of interest to people doing due diligence and things like that. The next substantial part of the report is the Pastoral Panel. So the Pastoral Panel is 27 producers that we went out to and sought responses from, with 6 questions that we asked them, 6 qualitative questions. And from that process, we received 43 pages of wisdom from those producers. So a bit of background on the Pastoral Panel. We're lucky to have a few of our producer group clients in the room today, and they will testify that the work that we do, we can look at the numbers and provide a bit of insight by looking at the numbers, but we're not in the business of managing beef enterprises. And a lot of the learnings that we have and a lot of the learnings that come from our group experience are from shared wisdom and experiential learning within the group. We've tried to take that idea and put it into a publication through the Pastoral Panel. So we've captured a bit of experiential knowledge and intellectual capital, which complements a lot of the more analytical financial and production data that we present. So the 6 questions that we asked, number 1, what are the key things you now know that you wish your younger self had known? So there's a clue there that we only asked older people to respond to the Pastoral Panel. How has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? What are the biggest industry myths that constrain profitable beef production? What process do you employ to avoid the myths and obtain reliable information? How is risk best managed for long-term success? And what does sustainable beef production mean to you? So overall, the responses were fantastic. It was really enthusing to go through all the responses, and it was quite a kind of energising experience to go through and compile all the wisdom that we received. They were frank, insightful. Sometimes they were contrary. I think we think that's good, and we think they were contrary because people offer different perspectives from different regions and different enterprises. But unfailingly, they were thought-provoking. So a sample of the responses here. We got a range of all sorts of responses, very pragmatic and practical responses, all the way through to high-level philosophy. So I'll leave that for you to read. But a sample here, if I'd have known all of them at the start and how they combined, I'd be a long way ahead now. So thinking about all the different factors that contribute to beef production and how they link together. We had to make huge changes to be profitable or face a bleak future. The hunger to improve help us seek out better options. Quite a philosophical and a thought-provoking one. Thinking is the hardest work I do. The secret to future success is a never-ending quest for improvement. That way you never quite get to a final destination as the goalposts continually shift. And I think that speaks to Ian's comment before about we're very fortunate to work with producers that are always looking to improve. They're not sitting on their laurels, and they're always looking for ways to extend themselves. And speaking to the point we keep coming back to in the report about valuing intellectual capital, I think this one nails it. Knowledge has become our most valuable asset. The other unique part of this report was the chapter on the effective management and utilisation of the natural resource base. So just to go through the who, the why, who and the what for that. So why is it important? The beef industry manages 50% of the Australian land mass, and that's really the beef industry's competitive advantage here in Australia, is our natural resource base. The natural resource base itself underpins industry performance, and the management of the natural resource base has big implications on business performance. So the general business performance and the volatility of production, so how well the natural resource base is managed, we've observed is really crucial to risk management and volatility of business returns over time. Industry sustainability, so actual sustainability, whether a piece of country can be sustainably used for beef production going forward, and also the perceived sustainability, so people use the term social licence to operate in the beef industry. The natural resource base and management is critical to that. Who contributed to the natural resource base chapter? 3 practicing experts in the management of the natural resource base. So we went out to them. We're not experts in this area. We think it is critical. We think it's the number one factor that beef producers manage in their everyday management of their business, but we're not experts, so we sought out external expertise. It's important that the people we sought out had dirty boots, so to speak. So as Ian said before, one of our authors, Cole Payton, works extensively with us and can't be with us today because he is out in the paddock working with producers on forage budgeting and different things like that. So they've got experience with producers and experience in the industry. But not only that, they've got a good understanding of the science, the research that's been done. They're up to date in their knowledge, and they're able to apply it in practical circumstances. So what does the end result look like? We think it's quite a handy resource on how beef producers should and can manage their feed base for optimum production and environmental health. So again, looking at that distinction between Northern Australia and Southern Australia, and Northern Australia operating predominantly on the rangelands, We sought out Dione Walsh from the Northern Territory Department of Industry, a very experienced practitioner based in Darwin and has worked all across Northern Australia. And also Cole Payton, based just out of Toowoomba here, similar to Dione, a very experienced practitioner, done a lot of work throughout southern Queensland, and they both sort of combined very well to offer their perspectives. For Southern Australia, we had Bob Freeburn, very experienced pastures agronomist, again a practitioner who's worked a lot with producers over a number of years and has himself contributed a lot to the generation of tropical pastures and the use of different pasture species down in Southern Australia. So obviously working with improved pastures down there compared to the north, he offered quite a unique perspective there. So that's the natural resource base chapter. I'll hand back to Ian to talk through the reviews and how that was done.
Thanks, Michael. As I said at the start, given that this is an independent publication, we thought it was important to go out and get it reviewed, get it critiqued, to make sure there was rigour in our approach. So we did the same for the previous version. In this one, we approached Dr. Andrew Ash, formerly of CSIRO, who's recently left CSIRO, but he's got a wealth of knowledge of the management of the rangelands and has written a lot of good information and done a lot of good research on the sustainable management of the rangelands. We asked him to do a critical review of it, and his full review is on the website. So on our website, which is at the bottom down there, we've got the first 10 or so pages of the report, which includes the introduction, why we wrote it, who the reviewers are, and the reviewers' full comments. So if you look at that, you get an idea of what's in the report. But a snippet of his review was that he believes the Australian Beef Report 2020 will make a valuable contribution to the beef industry in Australia. We also approached a couple of producers to review the publication as well, and Andrew King from Romani Pastoral Company in Southern Australia. Again, his full review is on the website, and he congratulates the authors on this report, and it should add value to the beef industry. We also approached the Richardson Family, who are producers from the Pilbara region in Western Australia, and part of their review is that it doesn't sugarcoat or offer silver bullets. Instead, it directs ownership of the issues to each business owner, and that's, I suppose, a lot of what we're about. We don't think there are any silver bullets in this. We think it comes down to the fundamentals and having an unrelenting focus on them and understanding what they are. So what do you get when you purchase the report? This is a copy of it here in hard copy. It's only available in hard copy, 173 pages, and we do try and keep it concise, but there's a lot in this one. Will be express posted to you. You also have access to online resources where there's additional industry information. For all those cohorts we went through before, we've just presented a summary of that in here from the 12 years. All their detailed information, where you can go in and look for your region or your herd size, can be there. And this is a copy of it all printed out, the information that's available online there. So there's a lot there which we didn't want to clutter the report up with. The maps, Michael showed a couple there. There's a few more in the report, but there's a lot more that Michael generated that look at different regions, such as land values in regions, returns and that sort of thing in there as well, and decision support tools. We back this report up with a money-back guarantee. If anyone thinks that it hasn't improved their understanding of profitable beef production, we'll do a full refund for the report, which we're proud to have there. So the investment, the report retails for $295, including GST, and is available online through our website. We will do bulk orders of 20 or more at a discounted price of $199.